Your precious trees are gone, and there's nothing you can do about it. My neighbour laughed as I stared in horror at the stumps where my 80-year-old oaks once stood. With good lawyers, anything can be fixed. Little did he know I had cameras, permits, and protection orders that would cost him everything, including his mansion project and his standing in our community. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in April when I first noticed something was off. I was sipping coffee on my back porch, enjoying the spring breeze through the ancient oak trees that lined the property boundary between my modest home and the sprawling estate next door. The birds were particularly vocal that morning, almost as if they were warning me about what was coming. I'd lived in this house for 15 years. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and those trees were a big reason I bought it. They provided shade in summer, privacy year-round, and a sense of permanence in an increasingly developed neighbourhood. When Martin Donovan bought the massive property next door 6 months ago, I knew changes were coming, but I never imagined what he'd do. Martin wasn't like our previous neighbours. He drove a different luxury car each week, hosted loud parties, and seemed to view our quiet community as his personal playground. He'd wave from his driveway occasionally, flashing that too white smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Beautiful property you've got," he'd called out once. "Those trees must be a hassle, though." I'd smiled politely and said, "Actually, I love them." Something in his expression shifted then, just for a second, before the smile plastered back on. That Tuesday, I heard engines. Chainsaws. My coffee mug nearly slipped from my hand as I rushed to the property line. 3 men in work clothes were already halfway through the first oak. "Stop!" I shouted, running across my lawn. "What are you doing? These are on my property!" The workers paused, looking confused. One pulled out a paper. "Sir, we have authorization to clear these trees. Owner's orders." "I am the owner," I insisted, "and I never authorized this." The confusion lasted only minutes before Martin strolled over from his side, dressed like he was heading to a country club instead of a construction site. "Morning, neighbour," he said casually, as if my world wasn't being destroyed before my eyes. "Just clearing up this boundary area for my new pool house. The survey shows these are on my side." "That's impossible," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have the property maps. These trees are mine, and they're protected by the county preservation order." Something flickered in Martin's eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, but his smile never wavered. "Well, I have a new survey," he said, producing a document from his jacket pocket. "My team conducted it last month. Seems the boundary isn't quite where you thought." I glanced at the paper. It looked official, but something felt wrong. Very wrong. "Stop the cutting until we sort this out," I demanded. Martin's smile tightened. "The crew is on a schedule. Tell you what, if there's been a mistake, I'll compensate you. How does 5,000 sound? For a few old trees?" "They're not for sale," I said firmly, "and they're protected. You need permits even if they were on your property, which they're not." That's when his mask slipped. Just for a second. His eyes hardened. His jaw clenched. "Look," he said, voice lower now. "The work is happening. I have deadlines with my contractors. If there's been some misunderstanding, we can sort it out later." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "I'm documenting this. You're destroying protected trees without proper authorization." That's when he laughed. Not a friendly chuckle, but something cold and dismissive. "Do what you need to do. But with good lawyers, anything can be fixed, especially in a small town like this." The chainsaws resumed while I stood there, phone in hand, watching helplessly as the first tree crashed to the ground. By the time I got through to the county office, 3 trees were gone. The preservation officer promised to send someone out, but it would take hours. I retreated to my house, hands shaking with a mixture of rage and helplessness. Those trees had been here longer than any of us. They'd survived storms, droughts, and decades of change, but they couldn't survive one rich man's impatience. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Martin's smug expression, his casual dismissal of my protests. "With good lawyers, anything can be fixed." The words echoed in my head as I stared at my ceiling. By morning, I had a plan. Not a revenge fantasy, but something more satisfying. Justice. First, I needed evidence. I pulled out my home security system records. When I'd renovated 3 years ago, I'd installed cameras covering most of the property, including the boundary line. I scrolled back through the footage and found what I needed. Clear video of the workers arriving, Martin directing them specifically to those trees, and the moment when I confronted him. Next, I dug out my property documents. Not just the deed, but the comprehensive survey I'd commissioned when I built my workshop 5 years ago. It showed, without question, that those trees were 2 feet inside my property line. Then I called the county preservation office again. The oak trees weren't just any trees. They were heritage oaks, specifically protected under the county's preservation ordinance. Removing them without permits was a significant violation, carrying hefty fines. I also discovered something Martin clearly hadn't researched. Our community had strengthened its tree protection ordinances just last year after a developer clear-cut an entire block. The new rules included treble damages for willful violations, but I didn't confront Martin immediately. I watched and waited as he proceeded with his construction plans, as if nothing had happened. Workers came and went. Concrete was poured. Martin hosted another loud party where I overheard him boasting about his pool house project to impressed guests. 3 days after the trees came down, Martin knocked on my door. His smile was back, along with a bottle of expensive scotch. "Thought we should clear the air," he said, holding out the bottle. "I've been thinking about those trees. Let's call it 10,000 for the inconvenience." I didn't take the bottle. "This isn't about money, Martin." He sighed, as if I was being unreasonable. "Everyone has a price. Name yours." "Justice doesn't have a price," I said quietly. His expression hardened. "Look, accidents happen in construction. My crew misunderstood the boundary. I'm trying to make it right." By offering money after the fact, those trees were over 80 years old. "Trees can be replaced," he said dismissively. "So can neighbours," I replied, closing the door. The next day, I received a letter from a law firm representing Martin. It claimed the trees were on his property according to their survey, but in the interest of being a good neighbour, he was offering $15,000 as a goodwill gesture. I didn't respond. 2 days later, I was working in my garden when Martin approached the fence. His friendly facade had disappeared entirely. "You're making a mistake," he said coldly. "I'm trying to be reasonable here." I continued planting my tomatoes. Reasonable would have been checking the property line and permits before cutting down protected trees. "I've dealt with difficult people before," he said, voice dropping. "It never ends well for them. I have connections in this town you couldn't imagine." I looked up then, meeting his gaze. "So do I." Something in my calm response unsettled him. He was used to people backing down, to money solving problems. He wasn't used to quiet determination. "The monthly community council meeting is next week," I said, returning to my tomatoes. "I hope to see you there." He scoffed. "Those meetings are a waste of time." "You might find this one interesting," I replied. Over the next week, I methodically built my case. I spoke with the county arborist, who assessed the damage and confirmed the tree's protected status. I filed reports with the Code Enforcement Office. I had the property line officially resurveyed. I spoke with a real estate attorney who specialised in property disputes. Meanwhile, Martin's construction continued. The concrete foundation for his pool house was poured right up to where the trees had stood. He seemed to believe the matter was settled, or at least that his money and influence would eventually make it go away. The community council meeting was held in the library's meeting room. These monthly gatherings usually drew about 20 residents, discussing mundane issues like street repairs and community events. This time, the room was packed. Word had spread about the tree removal, touching a nerve in our tree-loving community. Martin arrived late, clearly surprised by the turnout. He nodded to a few people he recognised, including the council president, whom he'd played golf with. He took a seat near the back, looking impatient. Regular business proceeded until the council president reached new issues on the agenda. "I believe we have a property dispute to discuss," he said, looking uncomfortable. "Between Mr. Donovan and—" He checked his notes. "Mr. Reynolds." I stood up. "Thank you, but this isn't just a neighbour dispute. It's about community standards and the rule of law." Martin shifted in his seat, checking his watch. I approached the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Donovan ordered the removal of 4 heritage oak trees without permits. "This is ridiculous," Martin interrupted. "Those trees were on my property according to my survey, and if there was some mix-up with permits, that's a minor administrative issue." The council president nodded. "These things happen in construction. Perhaps we can work out a compromise." "I'd like to present some evidence first," I said calmly. I started with the video footage showing Martin directing the workers to the specific trees. Then I displayed my property survey alongside Martin's. The difference was obvious even to untrained eyes. "As you can see," I explained, "Mr. Donovan's survey mysteriously moves the property line by nearly 3 feet compared to all historical surveys. I've had the county surveyor verify the correct boundary just this week." Murmurs spread through the room. Martin's face had begun to redden. "Furthermore," I continued, "these weren't just any trees. They were heritage oaks, specifically protected under County Ordinance 42.3. I displayed the ordnance, signs, highlighting the relevant sections. The required permit process includes public notice, arborist assessment, and mitigation planning. None of that happened. The council members looked increasingly uncomfortable. Martin stood up. "This is being blown completely out of proportion," he said loudly. "I've offered generous compensation. Trees can be replanted. Let's be reasonable adults here." "I agree about being reasonable," I said, "which is why I'd like to play one more piece of evidence." I clicked to the next item, an audio recording from my security camera. Martin's voice filled the room. "Your precious trees are gone, and there's nothing you can do about it. With good lawyers, anything can be fixed." The room went silent. Martin's face drained of colour. "That's taken out of context," he sputtered. "I have the full recording available," I replied. "Would you like me to play it?" He didn't answer. I turned back to the council. "I'm not here asking for money. I'm asking for accountability and for our community standards to be upheld." The council president cleared his throat. "What exactly are you requesting?" "First, that Mr. Donovan's current construction be halted until proper permits are obtained and the boundary dispute is officially resolved. Second, that he be held to the same standards as any other resident regarding tree protection ordinances, including the prescribed penalties. And third, that he fund the planting of replacement trees in our community park, since the originals cannot be replaced." Martin laughed, but it sounded hollow. "This is absurd. Do you know who I am? Who I know in this town?" The council president looked pained. "Martin, I think it would be best if what?" Martin snapped. "If you side with him against me. After everything I've contributed to this community, over some trees." "Over the law," corrected a council member quietly. The meeting continued for another hour. Martin alternated between threats, attempts at charm, and finally, when those failed, grudging offers of compromise. But the evidence was too clear, the violation too blatant, and his recorded words too damning. By the end, the council had voted unanimously to support all three of my requests. Martin stormed out before the meeting concluded, slamming the door behind him. The consequences came swiftly. The county issued a stop work order on Martin's construction project the very next day. The Code Enforcement Office levied fines totaling over $100,000 for the illegal removal of protected trees. His building permits were suspended pending a complete review of his plans, but the community reaction was perhaps the most significant consequence. Neighbours who had tolerated Martin's arrogance suddenly became cold. Invitations to local events dried up. The social connections he'd been cultivating evaporated overnight. 2 weeks after the meeting, I was again in my garden when Martin approached the fence. He looked different, humbled perhaps, or just calculating. "You've made your point," he said without preamble. "What will it take to end this?" I straightened up from my planting. "Accountability isn't punishment, Martin. It's responsibility." "Fine," he said tersely. "I'll pay the fines. I'll plant your trees in the park. Just get the stop work order lifted." "That's not my decision. You'll need to comply with all the requirements and reapply properly." He stared at me for a long moment. "You could have just taken the money." "Some things aren't for sale," I replied. He shook his head. "I don't understand people like you." "That's the problem," I said simply. Over the following months, Martin complied with all requirements. He paid the fines, funded an extensive planting project in the community park, and eventually got his permits reinstated, though his pool house had to be redesigned to comply with setback requirements. He also became noticeably quieter. The parties stopped. He nodded politely when we passed, but never initiated conversation. 6 months after the tree incident, a for sale sign appeared on his lawn. I was sitting on my back porch the evening after the sign went up, looking at the empty space where the oaks had stood. It still hurt to see it. Though I'd planted new trees, they were just saplings. It would be decades before they provided the same sense of permanence. A knock at my front door interrupted my thoughts. It was Martin, holding an envelope. "I'm moving," he said, unnecessarily. "I saw the sign," I replied. He handed me the envelope. "This is for you. Not a bribe, not a payment, just something I should have done from the beginning." Inside was a handwritten letter of apology and a certificate showing he'd established a trust fund for ongoing maintenance of the new community park trees. "You were right," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Some things can't be fixed with money or lawyers. I didn't understand that before." I nodded, surprised by his gesture. "The trees were important to you," he continued. "I didn't respect that. I didn't respect boundaries, literal or otherwise. I'm sorry." The words seemed to cost him something to say. "Thank you," I said simply. He turned to go, then paused. The new trees you planted. What kind are they? Oaks, I said. The same variety as before. They'll outlive both of us if they're respected. He nodded slowly. Good luck with them. After he left, I returned to my porch with a fresh cup of coffee. The evening light filtered through my young trees, casting long shadows across the lawn. They were small now, but they would grow. Time was on their side. Martin's house sold quickly. The new owners were a family with young children who introduced themselves with homemade cookies and genuine smiles. They asked about the neighborhood, the schools, the community. And those new trees, the wife mentioned. They're beautiful. Were they always there? No, I said, but they will be for a long time now. That spring, I volunteered to help maintain the new trees in the community park. Many neighbors joined in, turning it into a monthly social event. The Martin Donovan incident became a reference point in local discussions about development and preservation. The council strengthened tree protection ordinances further and improved the permit review process. 1 year after the trees came down, I sat on my porch with my morning coffee, watching birds build nests in my young oaks. They weren't the same trees, but they represented something important. The understanding that some values can't be bought off, some boundaries can't be moved with money, and some wrongs require more than cash to make right. The trees were growing steadily, reaching toward the sky with each passing season. They wouldn't provide the shade or grandeur of their predecessors in my lifetime. But that wasn't the point. They weren't just for me. I sipped my coffee, feeling the morning breeze through the young branches. The quiet I'd always valued had returned. Not just the absence of construction noise or late-night parties, but a deeper quiet. The peace that comes from standing your ground, from protecting what matters, from knowing your boundaries are secure. Sometimes I think about Martin's words. With good lawyers, anything can be fixed. He wasn't entirely wrong. Good advocates can help resolve many problems, but he missed something crucial. The best solutions aren't about fixing after breaking, but preventing the damage in the first place. Respect accomplishes what money and power cannot. As for me, I found a strange gratitude for the whole experience, not for the loss of those magnificent old trees that still aches, but for the reminder that quiet strength often prevails over loud arrogance, that communities can rally around shared values, and that sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect isn't anger, but calm, methodical justice. My new trees grow a little taller each year. They're not just replacements for what was lost, but symbols of something gained, the knowledge that some things, respect, integrity, community, remain beyond price, no matter how good your lawyers are.